There is so much that we are bound to miss out in this precious little story. In our first reading about David and Goliath, if we do not put it in the context of the earlier chapter. The young David did not really come to battle, did not really come to the battlefield in order to fight. It was his three big brothers, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, who were there in the front lines in the battlefield because they were enlisted among the soldiers of the king. What about David? Well, he was not a soldier. He was taking care of the sheep when his father Jesse called him to deliver some food for his brothers in the military camp. Errands boy lang ang dating ni David dito. Like I told you yesterday, David was not interested in power. He probably did not even know what Samuel had anointed him for, even if the Holy Spirit had rushed upon him. He was quite happy with his work, shepherding the flock. He was also, according to the author, a good musician, a skillful player of the harp, and a good singer. The earlier chapter told us how David was sometimes called to entertain King Saul whenever the king was in a very bad mood, and that was very often. Whenever the king was acting like he was being possessed by an evil spirit, tatawagin na kaagad nila si David as the entertainer of the king. It was David's music that calmed down King Saul. Afterwards, David always returned to shepherding the flock. But on the day Jesse asked him to deliver food to his brothers, David heard Goliath, the Philistine leader, insulting his God and challenging any able-bodied Israelite to fight him one-on-one daw. All the soldiers of Israel, we're told, were gripped with fear and trembling. You know, I remember a nice poster caricaturing the difference between the reaction of the Israelite soldiers from that of David. Ang sabi daw ng mga terrified soldiers to one another, "My God, He is so big. How can we possibly defeat this giant?" But the young David looked at Goliath and held his tirador, slingshot, and a few stones. He looked at Goliath and he said, "Wow, he is so big, I cannot miss." A big reward had been offered by the king to anyone who would defeat Goliath. But David was not interested in the reward. He presented himself because he took offense at what this arrogant Philistine soldier had uttered against the God of Israel. "How dare you insult my God?" he said. He also had no intention of fighting like a regular soldier. The storyteller tells us David could hardly move when they dressed him up with a metal armor and a helmet, with sword and scimitar. Hindi naman talaga siya sundalo. Binihisan siyang sundalo. Ang bigat-bigat ng bihis sundalo. He found it so uncomfortable, so cumbersome. Anong ginawa niya? Hinubad niya. He took it all off. Instead, he fought in the only way he knew, like a shepherd protecting the sheep from the wolves or the lions that attacked the flock. Tinawanan pa nga daw si David when he presented himself boldly to take the challenge of Goliath. And his own brothers talked to him and said, umuwi ka na nga dyan? Ba't ka sumasaw-saw dito? Go back to shepherding. Baka hinahanap ka na ni tatay. But Saul took him seriously and he asked him, ano bang experience mo sa pakikipaglaban? And David replied and he said, I have tended my father's sheep for a long time now. Whenever a lion or a bear came and attacked my flock and carried off a sheep, I would go after it and fight it. I would snatch my sheep from its mouth, and I would seize the lion or the bear by the throat and kill it. I can do the same thing with that arrogant Philistine giant, he said. Well, unlike David, Goliath the Philistine was armed from head to toe when he challenged Israel. And unlike the Israelite soldiers who felt very intimidated by Goliath, David saw in him an easy target. He may really have said to himself, he is so big, I cannot possibly miss. And so, isang bato lang, with one stone, he was able to hit Goliath and make him fall on his own weight. Ganyan ang nangyayari. That is what happens to tyrants. To tyrants who boast of their power. Those who are overconfident about their resources and their weapons, and who speak with a lot of bravado. Ang mga mayayabang na nag-iinsulto sa Diyos. That is what happens to them. And they are taken by surprise when they are felled by an unassuming shepherd. Isang mahinang kalaban, ibabagsak siya. Well, the Lord makes that happen. An unassuming shepherd who is armed only with pebbles and a slingshot. Imagine that. The gospel writer is presenting Jesus in the same way, like a David before a Goliath. The Pharisees and the Herodians had joined forces, according to the gospel writer, in order thou to put Jesus to death. They even ridiculed Jesus. In the same way, the Philistines ridiculed David. But Jesus focused on just one enemy, Satan. In Tagalog, we refer to the boastful and the arrogant as malaking ulo. The arrogant and the boastful as mga malalaking ulo, big-headed. And I think Jesus was thinking like David when he saw the emptiness of the threats that Satan was making through his cohorts, the Pharisees and the Herodians. And I imagine Jesus saying the same thing to himself. Sinabi rin siguro ni Jesus, He is so big, I cannot possibly miss.